Hello my soccer viewers, to the review of round 38 in Serie A, the last round of Serie A, and no, there will be no spareggio neither for the title nor for relegation. It all worked out that everything got decided on the weekend. It was a little bit unusual that the title was decided on Friday evening, but boy what celebrations those were in Naples. And yes, for this video I decided to wear a Napoli jersey because I will dive into the negativity surrounding Milan in probably a final review video once we know also all the promoted teams next week. I have to say, I don't think there's any other place where titles are celebrated as passionately as in Naples. And I'm saying this as someone who does not support Napoli, but the scenes were just simply spectacular. If you see the celebrations after McTominay scores the opener that in the end led Napoli to the win, how it all erupted, and they were already celebrating even though the game was still halfway to play. This just showed all the emotions there, and you could see it after the game ended, how especially McTominay, he just broke down in tears because he finally got the recognition that he didn't get at United. Again, this is an indictment on United, but this should all be about Napoli. This is probably of all the titles that Conte has won, and Conte is the first Italian coach to win the title with 3 different teams, Juventus, Inter and now Napoli. This is probably the most impressive one, because this is a Napoli squad that, yes, had the advantage of not having to play in Europe this season, but this is a Napoli squad that is nowhere near as good as Inter's or many others. I would even say nowhere near as good as Milan's squad, who only finished now in 8th place. And yes, that's a different story. I'm coming back to Milan, but not in this video. This should be about the celebrations that we had in Naples. And yes, Napoli win their 4th Scudetto. They have now 2 with Maradona and 2 with Di Lorenzo captaining. That's also quite interesting. And yes, chaos all around, celebrations all around. And you could already see that Inter had resigned to their fate. They are focusing on what was the target at the beginning of the season, winning that Champions League in Munich next Saturday. But Sunday was also quite entertaining. Yes, it probably didn't have all the drama, but we had the drama of Lazio missing out on Europe altogether. Fiorentina being back in their favorite competition for the 4th year in a row. They played the Conference League, whereas Lazio miss out on Europe altogether. Watch out for Lazio next season, I gotta say. We have Juventus getting it just about over the line. This was a Venezia squad that really gave it their all. However, results also didn't fall Venezia's way, with Lecce getting this huge 1-0 win at Lazio, and Verona also get the points that they needed to relegate Empoli. So in the end, it's Lecce that survive, and I think that's actually quite nice because Lecce are an entertaining side to watch. It's always good to have a few more southern teams in there as well, especially since I don't think there's any southern team coming up either. So yeah, it was a match day full of emotions, positive as well as negative. So let's review all the 10 games that happened on this past weekend. Well, Inter still had a chance to win the Scudetto. Looking at the lineup, it was obvious that their focus is already on the Champions League final next Saturday, as they fielded more or less a 1B lineup, I would argue. But a lineup that was still strong enough to put pressure on Napoli and beat Como 2-0 away from home. Como did have the chances, playing in a rather weird black jersey at home. However, once De Vrij had it, a Çalhanoğlu header in the 20th minute. At that point, Inter took the lead in the table. It was only going one way. Then the most emotional scene came when Pepe Reina, who played his last game in his career, also last game for Como, of course, came out and tripped up Taremi. The referee didn't really call for it all that much, but after about a minute was played, VAR intervened and said, this was a trip and this was a last man offense, and so Pepe Reina got sent off to standing ovations from everyone, including every Inter player. I've never seen the like of it, that a player who was absolutely annoyed that he got sent off and a player that was sent off got a standing ovation. And so yeah, it was kind of bittersweet, but everyone honored the greatness that Pepe Reina has been throughout his career. Joaquim Correa in the 51st minute doubles up Inter's lead, but at the same time Napoli were already running away, and so it was more or less a worthless win for Inter, who, as I said, all focusing on the Champions League now. Emotions were running high in Naples. They knew with a win over Cagliari, they secured their 4th ever Scudetto, regardless of what Inter will be doing in Como. And Napoli actually had a few nervy moments. I mean, Cagliari, at least at the beginning of every half, did have their chances. However, Napoli also created plenty of chances that were missed in sometimes comical fashion. I think one by Politano and Spinazzola, where you really think this should have been the goal. And it felt like at that moment, with Inter leading 1-0, Napoli cannot just get it over the line. However, it was then their MVP, the league's MVP, McTominay, that gets the breakthrough after Napolitano cross into the box. He scissor kicks it into the net, and the whole city, it seemed, erupted. I have never seen the celebration of a goal. They celebrated like they already had won the championship. Yes, in fact, this was the winning goal, but there was a whole lot of game to be played. The celebrations were wild inside the stadium, on the pitch, and outside. You could see the flares going up everywhere. It was so foggy afterwards. It seemed like it was a November afternoon. It was like Mount Vesuvius just shifted a little bit further to the west and erupted right there. It was crazy, absolutely crazy. And as I said, at the beginning of the second half, there was again some half chances by Cagliari, and then it's a long Rahmani ball that Lukaku takes onto midfield and just goes past every Cagliari defender, runs onto goal, 2-0, and that's the game. And everyone knew at that point that Napoli will be champions. And it's McTominay and Lukaku, 2 players that Conte brought in, that got them the title. Then the game was only waiting for the celebrations. And yes, maybe Cagliari could have spoiled with another goal, but it ends 2-0. And then they were celebrating. Even Conte then came onto the pitch. It was emotional. My favorite moment though in the trophy ceremony was when everyone was already on the podium except Captain Di Lorenzo. However, President De Laurentiis already went with the trophy to the podium when his players were pointing, Capitano, Capitano. And then, yes, Di Lorenzo lifts the trophy, and he lifts now as many trophies as did Maradona. Although in Maradona's time, I don't think there was a trophy. We also had 2 meaningless games on Saturday. In Bologna, the fans were thanking the Bolognese players for the great season that brought them the first titles in '74. However, Genoa then proceeded to spoil that party with Vitinha and Venturino, scoring 3 goals in the first half. Orsolini pulls one back, but it ends with a 3-1 loss for Bologna. And Milan end a horrendous season with a 2-0 win at home to Monza, with a lineup that was more or less a B lineup. However, they still very much dominated. But the big headline is, of course, that the fans walked out on them after 15 minutes, the Ultras, after forming a go-home display. Milan were dominant, had good chances by Pavlovic and Joao Felix, who actually was a live wire in that one. And finally found a breakthrough after Jukwese corner was headed in by Gabbia, who gets his first goal since the derby. Before that, Joao Felix also had hit the crossbar, but he then gets his goal with a free kick in the 74th minute. Milan, 3 points, 8th place. I think at least you're not starting the Coppa Italia in August. Parma knew that they needed a point for survival. However, they had the steep task of going all the way to Atalanta, who, to be fair, had nothing to play for. But Parma did create quite some chances in the first half. However, they did not take the lead. That then fell to Daniel Maldini, who scored a brace just before the half to give Atalanta a commanding 2-0 lead, putting Parma a little bit at risk. However, in the second half, Parma finally reward themselves. Haino, in the 49th minute, gets Parma back into the game, and then it's Ondrejka who scores 2 more to turn it around. The last goal coming in stoppage time. In between, he also had a one-on-one with Carnesecchi. So Parma, very good for these 3 points and qualify for the next season in Serie A. The match between Empoli and Hellas Verona was a true final in the relegation battle. Empoli knew they needed a win and then hoped that Lecce and Venezia also do not pick up full points to get them safety. However, Verona needed also this solitary point, and they came out with a bang. Serda already heading it in the 4th minute. And yes, then Empoli came out, Verona hanging back a little bit more, and Fazzini in the 43rd minute gets the equalizer. So all game on, but Verona again take the game seriously, and the Chachua cross is then headed in by Bradaric. Very unlikely source of scoring that one at 69th minute, and Empoli didn't have an answer, and so they are down. It ended with the worst case scenario for host Lazio at the Olimpico, losing 1-0 to Lecce. Ahead of the game, Lazio's season could have ended in the Champions League, in the Europa League and Conference League, or if results would have not fallen their way, they would have been out of Europe altogether, and that's exactly what happened. Lecce, meanwhile, knew that with a win at Lazio, they're for sure in Serie A next season, and it was a very nervous game where then Lassana Coulibaly in the 43rd minute gives Lecce the lead, but Pierotti is also sent off with a yellow-red card not too long after. And so in the second half it was 10-man Lecce all around the box defending Lazio, who did have the chances. Tate Castellanos won, then Baschirotto headed it onto his own frame. There was a Zlatan-style kick by Romagnoli that also didn't surprise the keeper. Lazio were really trying everything. They also then had a man sent off because Romagnoli touches the linesman. I thought it was a rather stupid red card. But yeah, it is Lecce winning 1-0, thus securing survival, and Lazio are out of Europe because Fiorentina turned it around at Udinese. Lorenzo Lucca had given Udinese the lead in the 26th minute. However, Biol is sent off with a second yellow card in the 39th minute. So advantage Fiorentina, and Fagioli gets the equalizer right after the kickoff. And then Comuzzo in the 57th turns the game around. Cabele, just 4 minutes later, manages an equalizer once more, but then it's a deflected shot by Moise Kean in the 82nd minute that finds its way into the net. Thus, Fiorentina draw level with Lazio, but they won the head-to-head and are again back in the Conference League. Roma kept their Champions League hopes alive with a 2-0 win at Torino. Paredes converting a penalty in the 18th minute and Salemakas in 53rd, securing that win. And so all eyes were then on Venice, who also had some hopes for survival or maybe even a spareggio. Fila gave Venezia the lead in the second minute already. However, Costa then equalized with a beautiful goal that was chalked off for handball. The game ebbed and flowed. I mean, Venezia met Juve on level terms. However, Juve were always a slightly more dangerous team. In the 25th minute, Kenan Yildiz equalizes for Juventus, and then Colomani in the 31st minute gives them the lead on the night. And, as I said, Juve were slightly the better team. However, Hubs in the 55th manages another equalizer for Venezia, who were then pushing for the win, a win that they badly needed, although in the end we know now that it wouldn't have worked out, and then they give away a penalty that Locatelli converts in the 73rd minute. There were still the chances for Venezia to equalize and knock Juventus out of the Champions League, but in the end Juve just about get it over the line and can count on Champions League football next season. With all these games, the final table looks as follows. Napoli win with only 82 points. This is a relatively low points total ahead of Inter, who have 81. I cannot shake that feeling that Inter have blown this title more than Napoli have won this one, because this Inter squad was so much better, but they didn't have the defensive solidity they had last season, and maybe also a little bit squad planning, because as soon as either one of Lautaro and Thuram missing, and this Inter team didn't really have the punch that they usually have, and add to that they conceded many goals. And yes, it was last week where they really threw away the title, because a win against Lazio, and it would be Inter now being in first place. Atalanta were in the title race for a while. However, in the end, they finished in third place. It is unbelievable that this team still manages to finish in the Champions League. So huge credit have to go to them. And Juventus just about get it over the line. It would have been the other feel-good story of this year if Roma would have qualified for the Champions League after Ranieri took over when they were just a spot away from being relegated. So major turnaround. Also Fiorentina, I think, had a really good season. That they had a really good run in the fall, then it was kind of going sideways, but in the end they finished in Europe, whereas Lazio had the opposite. Really strong start to the season, but they could not keep up the pace, especially with also Europa League commitments in between as well. Milan, we don't need to say anything about Milan this time around. Bologna finished only in 9th place when they were fully in the Champions League race. However, it will not matter to them. They won the Coppa Italia, so that's the most important. Then we have a broad midfield of teams that did not go anywhere, but it was also solid. Como, Torino, Udinese and Genoa. Especially for Torino, I always feel they could do more, but they never do. And then the relegation zone. Verona, actually, they keep on surviving in a way that we know we only have to beat at least 3 teams this season, and yes, they do it again. Cagliari likewise, Parma survive, it was a promoted team. Lecce also survive. Empoli, Venezia, Monza have to go down. Monza, that is also a major surprise because no one expected them to be as bad, but I guess they have been overtaken by local rivals Como. So 2 promoted teams survive in Serie A, not something that you see very often in top leagues in these times. There are no Serie A games left to play. However, we have Serie B. We still have to decide who is the third team that goes up. We have Sassuolo coming back after a year. They were romping through Serie B. And we have Pisa making a return. So we will have a stadium that's almost next to the Leaning Tower in Serie A next season. So I guess Pisa going in for Empoli. Kind of, we have enough Tuscan teams in there as well. And then the last one is between Cremonese and Spezia. Cremonese, I think, from Lombardy, Spezia in Liguria, but also very close to Pisa. I think it would be interesting to have Spezia in, but you know, Cremonese is also a nice team to have. They play the playoff final on Friday and on Monday, so I'm planning to do a final Serie A recap video where I also talk a whole lot about the rotten season of Milan. Yes, I have said I don't want to talk too much about Milan, but one thing I do have to say is that it seems like imminent that major players will be leaving Milan already. We saw a post by Leao that very much sounded like goodbye. Theo did not play. I also have a feeling that he might be sold by the club, and Tijani Reinders, probably the best player this season for Milan, is on his way to City, it seems, because they would like to have him at the Club World Cup. It's really doom and gloom, but you know, I want to wait. This is all developing stories. I want to wait for that, and I really will give you all my opinions on Milan in next week's final Serie A video of the season. In any case, please let me know your thoughts on the final match day. Did you enjoy the celebrations in Naples as much as I did? I honestly have to say, yes, they are not my team, but I felt all the emotions. I really want Napoli to win that one and not Inter get another title. They have a shot at the Champions League, and if they win that one, then all the disappointment having no domestic titles will probably dissipate majorly. In any case, please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like these, and I will be talking to you soon about more things in my Serie A universe. Bye! Hey there! I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, here are some videos and playlists that you may enjoy too. Also, please consider subscribing to my channel and hit the little bell icon so you get notified whenever something happens in my soccer universe. And with that, have a wonderful day. Bye!